Strangers Chapter 1 is directed by Rennie Harlan, and it is a reboot remake of The Strangers from 2008. And I remember in 2008, I was 17 years old when this movie came out. It was an R-rated film, and my local theater didn't let anyone under the age of 18 in to see R-rated movies, so I bought a ticket to see What Happens in Vegas and then snuck over to see The Strangers. I was terrified from that movie. I loved the home invasion aspect of it and the fact that they were killing people because they were home. There were a lot of creepy and jump scare elements that worked for me in that movie, and I remember I liked it so much that I went back with friends, bought another ticket to What Happens in Vegas, snuck back into another showing of The Strangers, and watched it for a second time, and I now own it on Blu-ray, and it's a movie I put on every couple of years. It's just a really good home invasion film. So when I heard they were doing a reboot remake of The Strangers, I thought, okay, well, all the pieces are there. You have to have 3 creepy people in masks. But then I found out that they went for gold when they made this movie, because they not only filmed The Strangers Chapter 1, but they filmed Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 all together. And then I assumed, okay, well, these will drop on streaming at some point. But then they're like, no, all 3 of them are going to theaters. The first one's going to be in May of 24, and the next 2 are going to be in September and October of 24. At least that's what I read before watching this movie. After seeing this movie, I'm not sure if they'll still get theatrical releases, but with that said, let's talk about The Strangers Chapter 1. The movie this time around follows Maya and Ryan, a couple that has been dating for 5 years. As they go into the Pacific Northwest, they stop in a little town in Oregon to get something to eat, and when they get out of that restaurant, their car has issues. Now, Ryan is skeptical at first because he's like, wait a minute, there's a body shop across the way. They saw us get out of the car and go into the diner. Maybe they messed with the car. It's a newer car, so maybe there's an issue. But Maya's not buying it. She's like, no, bad things happen. We had a spin out on the road earlier, and so maybe something happened to the car. It's fine. There's an Airbnb. We will rent it. We will go to it, and everything will be fine. So they go to this Airbnb, and that is when the strangers show up. Or are they the strangers? When you think about it, maybe it's the people in masks, or maybe it's the people at the Airbnb. But the point is, they go to this Airbnb, and the people in masks come, and in normal strangers fashion, there's a knock on the door. And a girl says, is Tamra home? Just like in the 2008 film. And from there, things start to break down, and the people outside get a little more aggressive throughout the movie until they are full-scale breaking into the house with an axe and chasing them into the woods. Now, if that sounds like an exciting horror film to you, well, you should go check this movie out. And part 2 and 3 are set to come out later this year, so if you want to be caught up, you should definitely check this one out. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. My first positive for this movie is going to be how well lit the woods were. And that's the first time I've ever said that in a review, so that's a first for The Strangers, but I mean it. At one point in this movie, Ryan and Maya are trying to escape from the strangers. They break out of the house, and they're running through the woods, and the movie could have very easily just gone the cheap route, made it all a little too dark to really see anything, and just gotten through those scenes really fast. But they take their time in the woods, and the way they lit those scenes, it looks like natural moonlight. You see a couple still shots, especially of the guy with the axe in the woods, and it looks incredible. I remember seeing those still shots before the movie came out and thinking, wow, that's a really well-lit picture of the guy with an axe in the woods, but the movie's probably going to be darker in tone. So I was watching for that when I saw this, and no, it is a gorgeously lit scene. It really is. I think everything they do in the woods, as far as the lighting is concerned, top notch. My other positive for this movie is going to be a little bit of a spoiler, so minor spoilers ahead, but I feel like I can't talk about this without giving you a little bit of a spoiler here, and that is that I love that it kind of felt like the town is in on these murders. Now, I can't prove that, not yet at least. I'll have to see part 2 and 3 first, but I liked that in this movie they went a different route than that 2008 film. In the 2008 film, there were 2 people at a cabin, and it just so happened that the strangers were going from cabin to cabin looking for people, and because they were home, they killed them. Now, that is a terrifying concept, but in this movie, it really does feel like the town might be in on it, because they go to this diner, they get the side eye from a lot of people kind of talk down to Ryan, and then they go back out to their car, which looks like a brand new car, but the alternator's somehow dead, and the shop just happened to be across the street, and then just happened that the town has this really nice Airbnb that they feel like they're invited to, and then it just so happens that the strangers are out there killing people. To me, there seems like there's a little bit more mystery to this, and I kind of like that. So I'm looking forward to parts 2 and 3 just so I could figure out, okay, is the town in on these murders? Is there a bigger angle to this? Is there a cult-like aspect to this? Because that would be something fresh. And in that way, this movie did feel fresh. Now, unfortunately, that's where the freshness ends, and I have to get into my negatives. So I ended my positives with how the movie felt fresh, but now getting into my negatives, we have to start with how this really feels like a lot of retread of that first movie. You have a couple, goes to a cabin in the woods, the stranger shows up, there's 3 of them, they do the exact same thing where they knock on the door and ask if Tamara's home. They do that a couple times, so they get a little more aggressive. They're in the house while the girl's walking around with just a shirt on and some underwear. Like, the movie is a lot of retread of that first movie, and while I did praise this movie for being fresh in the storyline of getting them to the cabin, I wish they had done a little bit more to make it feel fresh rather than going back to the well for different aspects of that movie. My next negative is another retread of the first movie, and that is in the first movie when the male character realizes that things aren't going well. He calls his best friends like, hey, come pick me up. It's just not looking like it's going to be any good. And his friend's like, sure, I'll come. Then the strangers come to the house, things start going crazy for them, they've got a shotgun in the closet, and when his best friend shows up, played by Glenn Howerton, he turns the corner and plow, he gets shot in the head by the main character, and the impact of that kill is huge because the main character just killed his best friend. So you, the viewer, feel that in so many different levels. Like, you want this couple to get out of that house alive, and now the one person who shows up to help them just got killed, and it's a great scene, a lot of impact. But in this movie, they try to redo that scene, but they do it with Joe the refrigerator guy. And Joe the refrigerator guy is the Airbnb owner who, again, may or may not be in on this whole thing if the town is in on it. So when he shoots Joe the refrigerator guy for showing up to fix the refrigerator, you, the audience member, don't have that same impact that you had in the 2008 film because there's no connection between Joe the refrigerator guy and the guy renting the Airbnb. There's none at all. He shoots him, he feels remorse for a minute, and then he's like, all right, we got to get out of here. Whereas in the first movie, like, he breaks down, he just killed his best friend. So they try to redo that scene, and there's just no impact. My next negative for this movie is going to be the vanishing abilities of the strangers. And what I mean by that is that these strangers have the vanishing powers of Batman. It really feels like that in a lot of this movie. Some of it you could explain away, like I really like the piano scene where he's sitting behind her. I could see she's distracted with the keys, maybe she doesn't notice he's there, and when she does look up, he's gone. I don't have a problem with that. But there's a scene in a shower where he's directly next to her and just looking in her shower as she showers, and as she turns her head, boom, he's gone. And there's several moments throughout the movie like that, but the most egregious vanishing power in this entire film actually comes in the end credit scene, because you could maybe explain away the Airbnb vanishing powers if it is set up by the town, like maybe there's hidden passages in the walls. That is a very good possibility. So I'm not going to completely fault the movie for that if they are able to explain it away, but there's a scene that is just egregious and there's no way to explain around it. There's a vanishing act that makes zero sense in this movie and actually comes at the end credit scene where the girl is laying in a bed and you see an aerial view of her, and as she sits up, boom, the sackhead guy is directly next to her in the bed. There's no way he could have gotten there. They don't have trapdoors in a hospital. There's no way he was there the entire time. It was egregiously, laughably bad. So in the next 2 installments, I hope they don't have the same vanishing powers, but since they filmed all these at the same time, I don't have a lot of hope that they're not going to do that. And that'll lead me to my final negative, and that is that this movie, this horror movie that is a reboot of a franchise that was pretty gory, has none of the gore. And if you're going to reboot a franchise that already went to the limit with the gore, you have to up that limit. But in this movie, they don't do that. There's 2 different scenes where somebody gets stabbed, and that's pretty much the extent of the goriness. Now, again, could be part 2 and 3. They're just saving it. They're just holding back because in 2 and 3, they are going to unleash these guys. They've got all kinds of knives and axes, and they're willing to use all different kinds of weapons. So maybe there's going to be a little bit more to the gore in those films. But in this movie, if we're judging it just by this movie, 2 stabs. That's the most you're going to get. 2 stabs. And that really didn't work for me because, again, when you're going to reboot a franchise that's already known for its level of gore, then maybe you go to the next level with it. But instead, they're just stab, all right, stab, okay, we're done. That's the movie. And it's like, that's the amount of stabbing that we got. It's it's not even a slasher at that point. Overall, I'll say that this movie was enjoyable, and I would recommend it to you if you can separate the first two Strangers movies from your mind. I didn't love Strangers Prey at Night, but I really did love that original 2008 Strangers film. So if you separate those movies out and you say this is just a rebooted franchise, we're going to start here, then I think you're enjoyable. But if you compare it to that original film the entire time, then I think you're going to have a less enjoyable time, and this might not be for you. But I will say that if this movie is kicking off a franchise of 2 more films that are already shot and already coming later, I think the average moviegoer is not going to care as much. And so you're going to have this chapter 1 and people are going to be like, all right, well, I saw it. I'll just wait for streaming for the other 2. I think that is going to be the general consensus. But those are just my opinions because that's my review for The Strangers Chapter 1. Guys, if you had a chance to see this movie, if you have, let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are, where we agree, where we disagree. Maybe you like the vanishing abilities. I don't know. But if you like this review and you want to watch more of the content on my channel, don't forget to hit that like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Strangers Chapter 1 review. I'm looking forward to the next 2 chapters, but I'm optimistic about them because I'm hoping that this movie is just the jumping point and we get the gore we're wanting. We get a little bit more of the story that we're hoping to get. I don't know where they could go with the next 2. I feel like the next 2 are just completely open. If they do try to just remake the second movie immediately, I'll be very curious where they're going to go with the third. But with all that said, though, guys, if you like this review and you want to check out all the other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.